Welcome back to the Crash Course podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins, joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B Scott. It is the one of the better times of the year. We get to talk NFL draft. I know B Scott is just absolutely giddy. He is ready to go because we get to kind of dive in here. We get to kind of speculate on the direction of most importantly the Indianapolis Colts, but also speculate on the future of this one of the sports we love in the NFL. It's always a great weekend.
Yeah, it definitely is. I love how they expanded it from just being 2 days to basically a 3-4 day event. I love it.
Yeah, the NFL definitely, it goes without saying, but, knows how to put on, a good event. They know how to, make it spectacular. And, it makes total sense. A lot of things get kind of, oversaturated and overdone. It's wow. But, this makes sense to be hey, you know what? The first round, these are going to be our, the people that, you're going to be buying jerseys for and watching, theoretically the rest, for the next, 10, 15 years. Let's get those guys on display. Second and third round, those are still guys that are going to be important to your team. And then, it can be kind of that boring, third and fourth day, basically from, the fourth on.
Yeah, but still, it's exciting because it's a huge event that's celebrating the accomplishments of these young men, and it's we're all celebrating that their job interview went well.
Yeah.
Essentially. Now some of them won't make the final rosters and everything, but still, they can say they got drafted into the NFL, and that's why I'm always still a huge opponent of when teams are punished by losing a draft pick. I feel like that's not just punishing a team, that's punishing that individual that's not going to be drafted, because they don't replace somebody else into that empty slot. There's a couple slots, I believe, this year that are a team that's not going to be drafting because of some kind of scandal or something. But I'm yeah, it hurts the team because that's one less draft pick for them, but by not replacing a team, putting somebody else in there, you're hurting this young man that's not going to get drafted. That's now
right.
One less possible pick for somebody to be picked in.
Yeah.
And I don't, that's why I don't like that punishment. And it seems to be being used frequently now. And I'm not a fan of it, unless you're going to say, okay, you got caught cheating in this game. Well, your opponent's not going to get your draft pick. Something like that, where you're punishing the team that got caught, but you're not taking away an opportunity from somebody else. I'm surprised the NFLPA has never brought that up.
I like that. The only problem is, let's say that so because in an instance of Spygate, where it directly goes to this against the St. Louis Rams at the time, now obviously now the LA Rams. That would make sense, but if it's something for instance, I know it's baseball, but something to the same caliber of the Houston Astros scandal. Well, they played 15 teams over the course of the season, so they obviously, in an instance like that, if a scandal that big happened in the NFL, you can't really be well, we're gonna flip a coin or draw a name out of the hat, and one of the teams that you played that you cheated against. Unless you maybe say, okay, well, the team that finished behind you in the standings, because that's the team that would have won. If you're going to wipe the slate clean and wipe away the wins, which the NFL has never taken away wins. Right. But if you were to theoretically say, okay, they cheated the whole season, so all these wins are tainted, we're going to give it to, let's say the Patriots, had another cheating scandal, and okay, we're going to give their first round pick to the Miami Dolphins, that finished second. That would make sense. But there's not a way to do the whole, if a team cheated the entire season.
I have ideas for how. One, you just turn it into another compensatory pick, where, okay, this team lost this level of a free agent. This is their compensation pick. Okay, that. Or if it's a major scandal that affects multiple teams, you just do a lottery. do a lottery. All right, you've had the worst record. You got more ping pong balls in the similar to how the NBA does. Who gets the number one pick?
True.
So, okay, so this pick is up for lottery. The more the worse record you had, the more ping pong balls you have in the lottery, more chances to gain that pick. That's what I don't know. Just by taking that pick away, it's not just hurting them. Ultimately, there needs to be some kind of workaround. Or maybe in the end they're docked a certain amount of money from their cap space.
Right. The cap space makes sense. Well, so is there not? Because I thought there was 252 picks every single year. So does it fluctuate?
On paper, right. That pick will just that whatever pick number it is that the team had to forfeit. That pick will just be left blank, and the person that gets picked next will be still the number of the next team.
So, like, for instance, if the, I'm trying to think, who picked second this year? Why am I blanking right now?
I believe it's the Jets.
It's the Jets, yeah. So, for instance, if the Jets got caught and had to give up their pick, so it would literally
the third pick would still be considered the third pick.
That's why I gotcha. Okay, I was going to say, I was very confused, because, I don't remember a year where there was, this year we're only going to take 250. So, it's
always the same number, but it's just when you do the final math, there's going to be fewer players actually drafted.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But the last pick will still be 252.
But theoretically, though, if we're looking at it that way, I mean, I guess it does trickle down. So the player that if there's one, let's say there's two vacated picks, so then those two players that would have likely gotten picked are more likely to then be called in as a undrafted free agent. But I guess in theory that could also trickle down, because if you're only allowed so many undrafted free agents, then that means that's taking a spot away.
I don't think there's a limit on how many undrafted free agents you can bring in. No, I mean there's a roster limit. So ultimately you got to get down to your 52-man roster.
True.
And I mean,
yeah, so I guess you could theoretically bring in everybody.
Honestly, the only guys this is really going to affect, ultimately, I guess, are the ones that are going to that had the opportunity to get picked near the end of the 7th round.
Yeah.
Because everybody's just going to ultimately then bump up a slot, technically. I guess in the end, it just affects two guys not getting their name called, or however many guys not getting their name called. True. I guess it doesn't seem like that's that big of a deal, but
to those guys it is.
To those guys, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
They've busted their butts to get their name called in the NFL draft, not to go as an undrafted free agent.
True.
I
see what you're saying. Well,
but I mean, there's always guys that I guess in the end, there's guys that were projected 4th rounders, and then they fall to be undrafted. You just never know. Some guys are going to get their name called that didn't expect to get their name called, but it's just 2 less names, or however, I don't know the exact number. That's just an example number, I guess. But, that's just 2 less opportunities, because there is, I don't know. I don't know how it works out in contracts and everything, but, you see guys in the 7th round that don't make the final roster, but still the principle is they're missing out on that opportunity.
Right. Well, speaking of opportunities and speaking of these college athletes, one more thing real quick before we get into the meat and potatoes of the episode today is that there were a couple big announcements on the college football, the EA Sports college football game front, or at least things that will impact that. For one, I don't know if we talked about this the last time we talked about the college football game, but college football revamped. That has basically been a team of individuals that has updated the NCAA 14 game since it came out in 2013. They are now part or all of their team is now being consulted by EA. I saw that on Twitter today.
I saw a lot of announcements on Twitter today that I'm getting to live my dream and I'm going to be helping develop the new college football game. I was like, wow, you don't usually see that.
Right. So that's really good, because obviously these guys have gone to great lengths to keep this franchise alive. So they're going to bring the best to the table. And then I saw today that the bill that would allow players to profit off of their likeness is going back to Congress today as well. I got an ESPN notification about that. So fingers crossed, those are some big things that really go towards helping not only the quickness of the game getting out, but also the quality of the product once it does hit the shelves.
Yeah, we'll see. It's I definitely like how it's making the moves forward. So yeah, we'll see ultimately what ends up happening with it.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're also ready to talk the NFL draft. We're very excited to get to that. But before that, let's get a quick word from our friends of the show. The Crash Course Podcast is brought to you by Anchor. Looking to start a podcast but don't know where to start? Look no further than Anchor.fm. Anchor allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or mobile device, and will distribute it to other sites such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. On a budget, not only is Anchor completely free of charge, but will allow you to make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Anchor, it's everything you need in a podcast in one place.
Are you tired of your same old lunch hour of sitting and scrolling through your apps on your smartphone? Have you thought about playing a board game with your coworkers? Eat Lunch and Board Game is a podcast dedicated to telling you about board games that are great for lunchtime fun and some that are probably better saved for after work hours. I've been playing games at my office for over 4 years now, where I have made new friends and business connections that have been very useful. Board games build bridges.
All right, so it is finally time to talk NFL draft for 2021. Very excited. And of course, we're going to start off with the Indianapolis Colts. And we're going to take a look at what they were able to do this offseason, what leads us here to the draft today. First things first, talking about what they were able to do additions-wise this season. They traded for quarterback Carson Wentz. They re-signed running back Marlon Mack. They bring back wide receivers T.Y. Hilton and Zach Pascal. They add some depth on the offensive and defensive line with signing tackle Sam Tevy, tackle Julian Davenport, re-signing center Joey Hunt, signing guard Chris Reed, and signing defensive lineman Al-Qaeda Muhammad.
That was a re-sign.
Yeah, right.
Al-Qaeda Muhammad.
And then they re-signed Xavier Rhodes at corner. They re-signed T.J. Carey at corner. And then they bring in safeties Sean Davis and George Odom. George Odom being re-signed, yeah. And then, of course, the notable losses from this past season. Quarterback Phillip Rivers leaves to retirement. Anthony Costanzo, tackle, also leaves to retirement. Still unsigned is defensive end Justin Houston. Danico Autry, defensive end, signs with the Titans. Linebacker Anthony Walker goes to the Cleveland Browns. They also lost cornerback Traymon Smith and safety Taven Wilson. So that brings us to kind of the first question as we get into our draft conversation. And that is, hot or cold, the Colts have had a successful offseason. And, you know, when I say cold, I don't mean it as in, like, it's been terrible and, a team that once had Super Bowl aspirations now is lucky to get to the playoffs and, something like that. But I would say as far as being a successful offseason, it is a cold take. I mean, it wasn't a failure per se, but I wouldn't call it successful either. I mean, you look at it, bringing in Wentz was the highlight. Obviously, they needed to do that. But then, and I was very happy that they were able to bring back Mack, Hilton, and Rhodes. But, they had the opportunity here to put the finishing touches on a Super Bowl caliber roster, and they just kind of ran it back and just dropped the ball in a sense. I mean, if they end up not getting Justin Houston back, that's a huge blow. Already losing Anthony Walker and Danico Autry are big blows. They could have, adding a piece or two, whether it be on offense or defense, would have worked wonders. Like, if they would have said, okay, we didn't make any, because it's kind of like last year. Like, they didn't really do much. I mean, they ended up bringing in Phillip Rivers, but they didn't really do much. But like bringing DeForest Buckner like however many days before the draft was like, oh man, now we're pumped up, now we're ready to go, we're about to have a great season. And there was not that move this year. There was not that like, oh, now we're psyched, they're all in, let's go. And and just even this season, I mean, they were supposedly in on John Brown, wide receiver, and Kyle Fuller, and if they would have signed at least one of those two guys, I mean, I think we would be sitting here looking at this draft a whole lot differently for the Colts, because I was thinking about it actually this morning. I was like, I think that this is a make or break draft for Chris Ballard, not because I think if his players don't perform this year, he's going to be fired or anything, but leading in, so obviously, those who are diehard Colts fans and have followed this team know that Ryan Grigson left the cupboards bare and, on his way out, stuffed the toilet paper down the toilet and, trashed the house on his way out. So, two of the, most recognized, beloved players in Colts recent memory retired because of him, Andrew Luck, Pat McAfee. And so Chris Ballard had to kind of rise this team back up out of the ashes. And he's done that for the most part. And we've gone into every draft after that initial draft being like, you know what? Chris Ballard is playing 4D chess while everybody else plays Candyland. Nobody is on his level. And for the most part, he hasn't really had to do that. He's just done that. And now this year, because going through and doing this mock draft, I realized kind of how tough their situation is as far as, they pick 27th, 50 or 21st, 54th, and then don't pick again until 165.
No, I think it's 127.
127. Well, regardless, there's a lot of time between those first, few picks and then the next few picks that they have. And so they really have to make those picks count this year. And I know there's going to be most likely some draft day trades, 4 picks, that kind of thing. But this is the one time where I think Chris Ballard actually has to, be a magician, do his, do what we all have seen him do these past few drafts. The stakes I think are higher because this draft will make or break whether or not the window is truly open for the Indianapolis Colts, or if we're not as close as we thought we were, because there was a lot of talent that left out the door from the Indianapolis Colts this season.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think this is a freezing cold take, but this is definitely a cold take. I mean, obviously bringing in a quarterback that's in his prime, a younger quarterback, is a huge deal because now you don't have to figure out how to land one of the premier quarterbacks in this year's draft, which is a good thing. That's a big, big thing. Bringing back Marlon Mack, I like the move because it's only going to make the running game more potent. Bringing back T.Y. Hilton, he knows it's comfortable. I think the biggest move of the moves they made was bringing back Xavier Rhodes. So I really like that move. I feel like, so we haven't technically lost Justin Houston yet. I think he is more so waiting to kind of waiting out the draft to see what teams' needs are. My guess is he's not getting the number, the salary number that he's desiring, or the amount of years as well, one or both. Losing Danico Autry is a huge blow. It makes it even bigger, the fact that he's gone to an in-division rival. Danico Autry, I mean, he's not a Pro Bowl player, but he's one of those players that's going to really put up numbers next to guys that are like a DeForest Buckner that's getting a lot of attention put on him. Hopefully, we did see that come out of Al-Qadim Muhammad as well this past year, and Grover Stewart. So that's not as big when you see that. Obviously, Anthony Walker would have been one of those guys they would have brought back had they had somebody else that was a little bit more athletic than him ready to go in the wing to take over his starting position. It's going to hurt them, though, with that locker room leadership that he had. And he was just a fan favorite, locker room favorite, all of those things. I've said this many times on here. I understand that Chris Ballard plays the long game. I get it. And he's very frugal with his cap space because he's looking at what the future holds for this team. He's got to get an extension put in. He's got, re-sign Quentin Nelson, Braden Smith, Darius Leonard, guys like that. However, we're not seeing those extensions happen. So if he was like, all of a sudden we'd be here, the Colts have signed Darius Leonard to a X amount of years extension worth whatever. Same thing for Quentin Nelson and Braden Smith. Okay, I get it. You played your long game. Now we're set up for the foreseeable future. But he's letting their rookie contracts run as long as they can, and he's just sitting on this cap space where, okay, yeah, I understand you don't want to sign us up for bigger contracts for extended years. I get it. That's fine. But when you look at this past offseason and you saw so many players sign just for 1 or 2 year deals, okay, yeah, I understand that the 2 year deals because you got those big contract extensions coming up. But 1 year, you couldn't offer 1 year and use what we have right now to help get this team there. I know we're looking at the long game, but still, when you have an owner who's sitting there saying, yes, we can win multiple Super Bowls, our window is wide open. Jim Irsay, what are you talking about? This is a team that even you're bringing back essentially all the players except a new quarterback now that there's a lot of unknowns on, but this is a team that got bounced in the wild card round. What are you talking about? The window is wide open to go on a run of multiple Super Bowls. Last I checked, we couldn't beat the Buffalo Bills, yet alone the Kansas City Chiefs or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I mean, I don't know what window you're talking about, and then you guys are complacent to run it back with essentially the same team and hope that you nail all 6 of your draft picks. Because guess what? As they go deeper in the draft, those guys are not ones that are going to step in and be difference makers. Those are depth pieces, and hopefully you hope that they're a good special teams player. But so because of what you are doing by running it back and not spending any money, you are essentially saying we are going to nail at least our first 2 picks because you don't have a 3rd round pick, and you can hope that your 4th round pick is good enough to be an immediate contributor as well. The likelihood of that happening is very slim. So it's hard to see. I mean, obviously, I'm no NFL GM. I don't know the ins and outs fully like he does. But at the same time, I do understand that, if teams are handing out 1 year, $8 to $10 million contracts for top tier talent, you can't tell me we couldn't get in on that. Like, how is that a bad thing for the long game? Okay, there's $10 million this year, and they're off the books.
Right. Well, I mean, like
that's the part that confuses me. I mean, I don't know. And then there are bargain type players out there still that would be huge benefit, that would or help the Colts significantly in areas that they need help with. Now, maybe not left tackle. That's one. It's always going to be difficult. But like edge rusher, linebacker depth, safety. I don't know about what's out there too much with safety help, but at least linebacker and edge. There's guys out there that you don't have them come in and have Robert Mathis teach them how to be an NFL edge rusher. Those guys are out there already, and you can get some of them for pretty cheap. I'm just saying, it doesn't have to be a Justin Houston. There's a Ryan Kerrigan sitting out there.
I was going to ask if Kerrigan was still available.
I mean, about the same age as Justin Houston, even though it doesn't seem like it. It seems like Ryan Kerrigan should be younger than Justin Houston, but about the same age, and a guy that, yeah, he played linebacker for the Washington football team, but he's more of a hand in the dirt type of guy now anyways. I mean, I don't know. I guess, I mean, I do understand that they also are happy with the advancement of Tyquan Lewis and Kamiko Toure, but and then everybody has them taking an edge rusher. which when we get into the draft, before we get into the draft, I will say this. Everybody needs to stop having the Colts take anybody from Michigan.
Yeah.
Anybody. I saw a 7-round mock draft for the Colts today, or it should only be 6 rounds, where they took, with their first pick, Kwity Paye from Michigan. And in the second round, they took offensive tackle Jalen Mayfield from Michigan. I'm like, can somebody please tell me the last time a hyped up Michigan player, or any Michigan player for that instance, has succeeded in the NFL? I'll wait.
I mean, it probably
there isn't. There hasn't been.
Not recently. I was going to say the first name that pops into my mind is Mario Manningham. And like,
even that wasn't like,
I mean, he's not a Hall of Famer, but he won a Super Bowl, had a successful career. I mean,
and I'm trying to think there was an offensive lineman.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that was way back.
Wasn't one of wasn't it Jake Long?
Yeah.
Was it,
he really high. I mean, he was like a can't miss offensive lineman at the time, and he just got drafted by a team that was just bad in the Miami Dolphins. Like, you could say, Chad Henne. Chad Henne, no, he's a journeyman.
I mean,
backup quarterback
did help the Kansas City Chiefs get the AFC Championship.
That's true. But I mean, it's one of those deals where Kwity Paye, okay, yeah, he tests off the charts, but he was also on one of the worst defenses in the country. You never saw him make a difference for one of the worst defenses in the country. Jalen Mayfield, are you kidding me? No, it's ridiculous. The amount of, like, there's some drafts that have like 3 Michigan players going in the first 2 rounds, or at least I think I saw one that has 3 going in the first round. I'm like, are you serious? Are you serious? You're kidding me right now.
Right.
Like, yeah. If I'm a GM, them coming from Michigan, big old red flags popping up all over, because Jabril Peppers, this guy's a can't miss. He's a total athlete. Where is he now?
Yeah, I think he's on the Giants. I think, I don't know like what he's done for them really, but he's on the Giants.
He tested off the charts.
Right. It goes back to what we've said. I mean, we've said it. Yeah, I think pretty much every time it's come to the draft with this podcast is that, like, I think it's a combination. Like, yeah, you have to test well, but use your eyeballs, man. Like, exactly. It goes back to, we've talked about it at length ad nauseum with quarterbacks. Like, yeah, I understand that Kyle Buller can throw it 70 yards from his knees, but that doesn't mean he's going to be a great NFL quarterback. Why don't you look at the guys who actually went out, took teams that maybe weren't necessarily the greatest or were really good, and towed the line? I mean, Dusty up in the chat is talking about Mac Jones. I mean, Mac Jones literally, I don't think he's going to be your next Hall of Famer, but he showed you, hey, he can.
He got good leadership.
Yeah, he can.
He's got those intangibles that don't test off the charts.
Right.
But I do worry, though, about his lack of experience. He's got 1 season.
Right.
At that point, you do wonder, okay, is he kind of a flash in the pan? Especially is he a first-round talent? Oh, yeah, I think he's a first-round talent. But then I also go, man, I'm seeing him get drafted as high as 3rd. Is he really that high? I mean, when I look at all the other quarterbacks, yeah, I may be a little weary on Trey Lance because of the competition level, but then you got a guy like Justin Fields sitting out there that's like, he just like rewrote Big Ten record books in 2 seasons, led the team to the playoff a couple times. I mean, probably should have been multiple national championship appearances.
Right.
And the dude, I mean, he played with basically broken ribs in that semifinal game and just willed his way to a victory. That's a guy, when I look at that, those are the qualities I'm looking for in a quarterback. Somebody that's going to just lay it out on the line for his team every game. And that's what Justin Fields did.
Yeah. And we'll get more to that a little bit later on in the podcast. And, of course, Dusty in the chat asking not only about Mac Jones, but about Jalen Waddle. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. We're going to get right into our Colts mock draft here. Before we do, we want to remind you that you can like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Crash Course FM. Make sure you go check out 3C Media on YouTube. Not only can you see us, the podcast, if you don't happen to watch us live at twitch.tv/3C Media, you can still see our lovely faces at 3C Media on YouTube every Tuesday, as well as the MCT Podcast, a YouTube exclusive podcast where Chris, Tade, and Michael all talk sports as well. They've got a lot of good takes over there. We're at 30 subscribers, so thank you guys all for your support. Let's make it 50 here soon. Let's get it off the charts here. And then remember, you can obviously watch us live every week, twitch.tv/3C Media, as well as you can listen to us on, on the podcast side of things, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard, you can hear the Crash Course Podcast. So let's go ahead and start talking about the mock draft for the Colts. Of course, going into this year's mock draft, their team needs offensively are wide receiver and left tackle. Their defensive needs are pretty much all over the place. Edge rusher, linebacker, cornerback, safety. They could use, pretty much. I mean, obviously, there's more pressing needs than others, defensive end linebacker.
The linebacker is probably on the bottom end of that. You just need more usable depth.
Right. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and put my mock draft on the screen here.
I'm gonna put mine up too.
It's gonna show you guys at home the all the backgrounds that I've used as far as, or maybe it won't. Okay, good. I'm glad that it doesn't do that. I thought it was gonna show every single background I've ever had while I scroll through this. Where do
people are gonna be shocked at mine with how much what I've talked about.
Yeah, it's gonna be behind us a little bit here, but the funny thing is that
I will. Look, when see how I can move.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how can I get out of the screen.
Well, okay, so you see on this
I'll just
side.
have to walk away.
You see on this side, I got A's across. Yeah, you got A's. I got mostly A's too. I don't feel good about my draft because I feel like
it's not showing all my picks.
A lot of good talent fell to me. But and I feel like that's not what's going to happen in real life. You know what I mean? I don't know, which I mean, obviously we're not going to be able to predict, what's, everything that's going to happen, but this is what we think should happen as far as the Colts go. And I can see already on your side that it's similar to mine, which does make me feel a little bit better about things.
You just can't see on mine. You can't see
the last one.
My last pick.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and hop right in here. For me, first pick for the Colts, the way I approached the mock draft for me was I did not do any trades or anything.
Yeah, same here. That's such a crapshoot. You don't know.
Right. I don't, immediately, if I'm looking at a mock draft, I know there's a lot of experts out there that have their, finger on the pulse. They kind of know a little, obviously, more than we do. But, whenever I see a mock draft, it's this 3-team trade allowed this team to get this player. I'm I'm not even gonna look at that because that there's no you're just basically saying what you want. You're guessing and saying what you want to see. Whereas a mock draft where they're we went top to bottom first round to the 7th round in order. These are who we think are going to be the picks, and that's kind of how I approached it as well. So for me, first pick of the Colts is going to be pick number 21 in the first round. I had the Colts taking left tackle Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech. His NFL comparison is Russell Okung. I mean, when you go look at what Okung was able to do in the NFL, a 10-year career, 2-time Pro Bowler, Super Bowl 48 champion with the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, I think the Colts really do need to address that left tackle position, and Darrisaw will fit nicely. I think from day one he's going to be an instant, difference maker on that offensive line. And I think, in looking at what the Colts' needs were, obviously they needed a tackle, and I think that should be the first thing that they emphasize, because at the end of the day, I've kind of looked at Carson Wentz in a way, kind of this will sound mean, but I'm very excited to have Carson Wentz on our team. But he's kind of dollar store Andrew Luck, where he's not necessarily as good as Andrew Luck, but he's got similar skill sets in the fact that he's very mobile. He can make a lot of things happen with his feet, but and can take a hit, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't necessarily take all of the hits. So And with that said, one of the biggest, obviously, fall points with that, with Andrew Luck, was the fact that they didn't emphasize the offensive line before Chris Ballard got there. So I think it'd be really important, taking Carson Wentz away from a offensive line that ranked towards the bottom of the league. You're already moving him to an offensive line that is near the top, and this move to get Christian Darrisaw makes it just like even that much more better. So I mean, looking at what Darrisaw was able to do at Virginia Tech, he's an AP All-American, first team All-ACC. He didn't allow a sack or a hit in 2020. He's praised for his body control, strong hands, and footwork. And really, his only cons are he's just got a lot of raw talent. And I mean, that's what coming to the NFL is for: is developing that talent, making it great, making it into something that can be, a successful NFL career. So, I mean, when you have all the physical attributes and you went out and just kicked butt in college, and your only knock is the fact that, like, well, I mean, he's not an NFL player yet because he's not been, fine-tuned. I'll take that 100% of the time.
Especially now with who one of the Colts offensive line assistant coaches is now.
Right.
You do know that one of the assistant coaches is Hall of Famer Kevin Mawe.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, let's see. Who would you want to coach up your offensive line?
Oh, just
Kevin Mawe. Same thing with edge rushers for the Colts. I'll take Robert Mathis. I mean, seriously.
I mean, you can't go wrong there.
No. All right. So for my first pick, go this way. I went a little different. In my mock draft, Darrisaw and Samuel Cosmi were all the top tackles, the big names that you keep hearing that I've mentioned several times, were not available. So looking at the best players available and looking at the needs, I went with Elijah Moore, wide receiver out of Ole Miss. Obviously, it got me a grade of an A. He is a slot. He will basically be T.Y. Hilton's heir apparent, and he's the type of player that he's going to have that downfield threat, but he's also a really good route runner, has really good hands. That's one of the things you see from Ole Miss wide receivers. I mean, obviously he's not going to be tiny, he's not tiny like T.Y. Hilton, but he's more he's going to be good. And this is a guy that in some of the mock, I did the mock draft several times just to see kind of averages, how things kind of play out. He is a player that in one of them, I was able to land him at pick 54 as well, because there was one of the top end tackles was available. So this is a guy that has some, where depending on where people truly value him, he's definitely going to be on the board when the Colts pick at 21, and there's a possibility he'll be on the board at pick 54 as well. But looking at the other top end tackles, I mean, I've said multiple times, if Christian Darrisaw is available, you put any other strategy you had aside and you rewrite it for him, because he is clearly the second best tackle in this draft. Actually, probably the third best. The other two will be taken pretty high. Penei Sewell, I mean, obviously, he's the only one that is going to be an immediate impact, like instant, like possible Pro Bowl player. And then Christian Slayton, I believe it is. I think his first name's Christian, but he's from Northwestern, or Slater, potentially. I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now, but he's also a very high-end prospect as well. So Christian Darrisaw is one of those guys that he's the third best, and there's going to be a gap there where teams are going to make a run on defensive players or quarterbacks, and he may fall, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think eventually you're going to see a lot of teams realize the run on offensive linemen is going to happen. So Elijah Moore in my draft was there for me, grabbed him up, and he fits an immediate need of more weapons for Carson Wentz. Is it necessarily the highest priority, especially considering the Colts re-signed Zach Pascal? No, it's not, but it does fill a need. It's not the biggest need, whereas tackle is probably the biggest need.
Yeah, and I mean, pick number 54 for me, staying on that, notion, Elijah Moore, this way. Elijah Moore was there for me at 54. So I was able to nab him up. And, that was one of those things where, because I think, yeah, he was, like, looking at, because I only did it once because I knew if I did it more than once, then I would like just grapple over who I should actually like take. I guess I could have done twice and then like seen which one was better and then go with whatever grades were better and try to do that way. But anyway, I did it once. Elijah Moore fell to me, wide receiver out of Ole Miss. I mean, his NFL comparison is Antonio Brown. Who's off the field stuff aside, 5-time Pro Bowler, 7-time. Or 5-time All-Pro, 7-time Pro Bowler.
He's really good.
Right. I mean, AP All-American for more first-team All-SEC. I mean, think about all the defensive players that are going to get drafted.
All the secondary players.
Yeah, right.
Secondary players
right, exactly.
That are going to get drafted.
Right, and this guy had to go against them. And not only did he go against them, I mean, he broke A.J. Brown's school record with 86 receptions in 2020, and he hauled in 73% of contested catches in 2020. So, I mean, he gets knocked for his size, but he has great speed and route running skills. I mean, look, I know size, especially with wide receivers and quarterbacks, are important, but we've seen, players that don't necessarily have the greatest size go out and be amazing. I mean, T.Y. Hill. Yeah, exactly.
Tyreek Hill.
So, yeah, I think that it was...
Julian Edelman.
Right. So, I mean, this was a pick where I think these are the two biggest needs because I think the Colts, I mean, it's one of those things where, like, you kind of... shake your fist at Chris Ballard when you do this exercise because you're like, dude, if you would have just picked, if you would have signed one receiver, we could have gone and got an edge rusher at 54, and we would. I mean, I don't know if this year's class really lends itself to that, but we could have added something else at that pick, or even still like another wide receiver. Even
there was the amount of time every time I did this, there was always somebody that was a top tier corner available. It was very, very tempting to take like a Greg Newsome out of Northwestern or a Trayvon Mulrig out of TCU, somebody that would be a difference maker in the secondary.
Right.
But knowing, and I'll tell you, anytime I chose that, it got me like a C grade. It wasn't a very highly graded outcome specifically for the Colts.
Right. So, I mean, I think that those are, like, because looking at it, I mean, you see it on the board there. They don't have a pick again until 127, so obviously they got to make this one count. And I think those two picks are the biggest need, tackle and wide receiver. And I think, Elijah Moore, if the Colts can find a way to get Elijah Moore, I think they're going to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah. And, and this is, when we honed in on a wide receiver last year, it was Michael Pittman. And ultimately that one came true. So for my pick at 54, I landed Walker Little, tackle out of Stanford. One of the things you got to realize, you may be like, ooh, man, I don't know if we can really trust anybody that deep in the second round to be our future left tackle. You got to realize Walker Little at one point was considered a first-round talent. This offensive tackle class is a very deep one. There are a lot of really good players. I mean, it came down to, when I was picking, it came down to Walker Little or Tyler Taylor, Radens from North Dakota State. I'm trusting Walker Little a little bit more coming from a Power 5 conference. And this is a guy that has the intangibles, and I feel like, any of them beyond the first two guys picked are going to need to be coached up. And in the second round, you don't have that. You don't have to worry. You don't look at him as much as a guy that has to come in and be a Pro Bowl caliber player right off the bat. Getting a little coaching on him. I mean, he's a smart guy. Obviously, went to Stanford, and was highly talked about. But just because of the run on the area of needs from other teams, he does fall because of that. He's one of those players, though, any other year, if it wasn't so deep with quarterbacks, he would be a first-round type guy, that maybe a late first-round pick. And that's the type of player that he's going to fall, and he's going to end up having a chip on his shoulder, I think, because of that, and that's really going to help this team. This is a guy that is going to be a solid pick for the Colts to really help with that offensive line, especially now that there's so much depth. He doesn't have to come in, and if he does struggle a little bit, you do have Julian Davenport there. You do have Sam Tebby there. You've got guys that can help out a little bit. And then, like I said earlier, with the addition of Kevin Mawe to the Colts coaching staff, that is huge for development of offensive linemen. So you can line this guy up, help him develop, and still line him up next to Quentin Nelson, who's going to help hide any type of tiny deficiencies he may have. So it's a win-win situation here.
Yeah, and I mean, also, you talked about, getting a tackle like that late in the second round. I mean, this draft class is just loaded with talent out on the offensive line. So I don't think, it may cause people to shy away at first, but I think, no matter who's left is going to be a quality guy if they do end up picking a tackle at 54.
Well, and any of these guys these tackles that get picked in the second round, several of them have the ability to be picked in the first round. They could very well be picked in the first round. It just depends on how the draft boards play out for these other teams with their needs as well. I mean, I've seen Walker Little projected in the first round. I've seen Liam Eichenberg projected in the first round. I've seen Dylan Radins projected in the first round. I've seen all of them up there in the first round, but then there's also other ones that have them down this far as well, just based off of what other teams are needing and how they're prioritizing offensive tackle.
Right. So with the fourth round, I believe, is their next pick in the fourth round, right?
Third round.
Fourth round. Yeah. So it's their third selection. I guess I'll refer to that because I forgot to write down like which pick is where, so I'll just say their selection. Their selection number.
It's 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7.
1, 2, 4. Okay, so we're just literally not having a third round. Okay, I gotcha. I do like what I see at 127 because for me it's Shaka Toney out of Penn State, but for you it's Jonathan Cooper. Not to give away your pick a little bit, but I just think it's funny because literally I basically did a coin flip between those two guys. Like I was like, I think they're both like raw enough to where it's not necessarily a home run. But at the same time, we'll just kind of go and see what happens. But because I was like, honestly, I'm trusting, defensive players from Ohio State just because of what they're able to do. But I just kind of liked what I saw on Toney just a little bit more. First team All Big Ten, 31 tackles, 7.5 for loss in 2020. And in his analysis, experts said he can reach his highest potential as a pass rusher. He's very athletic and explosive, but he lacks in strength. So, I mean, that's something that can kind of be fixed, and it's kind of one of those situations, again, where, he's kind of more of a raw talent, but maybe working with Robert Mathis will kind of help that a little bit. So I just kind of liked what I saw out of Toney just a little bit more than what I saw out of Cooper.
So I went with Jonathan Cooper, mostly because, for a couple of reasons. One, yeah, he's not a guy that's going to jump off the stat sheet at you. He was doing that, though, in the Clemson game. I mean, that was probably the best game he's had of his entire career. Yeah, I remember Jonathan Cooper was one of these really, really highly recruited players to Ohio State. 5-star guy, was looked at as that next guy that's going to be following the Bosas, following Chase Young, all of those. And he didn't really pan out to that height, but he was still a very, very, very solid player that, if not compared to Chase Young and the Bosas, you would have looked at him as one of the next great, as performing as a great Ohio State defensive end. Just in comparison, didn't live up to those guys. Now, as a fourth round pick, this is a really, I believe this is a really solid, has really solid value, because not only is he a solid player, but he is also a guy that everybody on that team just at Ohio State absolutely loved. He was a great locker room presence, a great leader both on and off the field. This guy is a prototypical Indianapolis Colt player. This is the type of guy that the Colts look for. And you saw him progress over these past few years. I think maturity was a big part of that. I don't think he was able to hit his stride early on because, one, he was playing behind the Bosas and Chase Young, and just wasn't being featured. But when he finally got his opportunity to be featured, he really stepped up and I think he got more mature as far as becoming a leader as well. Getting him coached up by Robert Mathis, I feel like he has the ability to be one of the biggest steals of this draft. Now, what's funny is that he was even available sometimes in the 5th round when I would do this draft as well. But I feel like this guy, if the Colts can land him, and they do love their Ohio State defenders, he could have a very solid career. Do I think he has the potential to be a Pro Bowler like the next Dwight Freeney or Robert Mathis? I don't know, because it's really hard to predict who could be the next Robert Mathis. You didn't really expect Robert Mathis to be that either coming out of college. But I think if you line him up alongside DeForest Buckner, he's gonna cause some problems for opposing teams' offensive lines. He's gonna be that type of player. Right now, he's strong. He is very strong. So he needs to get a little bit more into his repertoire of pass rush moves. And I think working with Robert Mathis would be very beneficial for him moving forward.
Right.
But it got me an A- grade so far. If there was a college course on drafting, I would have been on the dean's list in college. This is nothing like what my grades look like in school.
Best
grades I've ever received.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say the only blemish for me comes in at 206, and I honestly don't. I think I got a little bit shafted with that C+ rating, but we'll get to that in a bit. But you say you made the dean's list. My favorite story is that the semester I turned 21, my parents were like, "Now, don't let the fact that you can, you're able to go out to the bars occasionally, detract from your grades." Literally got my best GPA of any semester that whole, they were worried about it being a distraction. And I was like, of course, I know how to do this. All right. I can do it. But yeah, so, and I mean, you mentioned, the fact that, you just don't know I mean, this is a part of the draft where, you could very well pick, the next great player, or you could pick someone who's never going to see a football field, or an NFL field. It's
such a crapshoot at this point.
It's
especially once you get into 6th and 7th round.
Well, it's what we've talked about when we talk about, when we talk a little bit more about the NBA draft. Literally, this is the equivalent of the 2nd round, where you're just maybe it'll be a good pick, maybe it won't be a good pick, but we'll just kind of see. And this is where we talked about Chris Ballard earlier, kind of putting those tools that we've seen over the past few years to good use, where he can find those great talents, show what he can do, show what his team can do, scout wise. So I do like what we have at 165, because you and I on the same wavelength. Derek Barnes. A linebacker out of Purdue, 2nd team, all Big Ten. So you had 6.7 solo tackles per game. That's 6th in the FBS. According to his profile, he can work as a defensive end in addition to linebacker in the NFL. So he's got some versatility, which you really like, because that's kind of the thing too. Because there's not a defensive talent in this draft. Like we talked about last year, if they hadn't made the move for Buckner, Javian Kinlaw was the kind of the guy that Javon, sorry. That was kind of the guy you talked about. There was no talent, especially this deep in the draft, that you could really be even at, early in the draft at 127, where you could be all right, this is the no-brainer edge rusher linebacker pick. So I think, finding guys that are just good athletes and have a lot of talent, and then kind of molding them into what you want to be is kind of the way you want to go. Experts say he's got solid speed and toughness, but his awareness is an area for improvement. So again, that's something where, working with that defensive staff, can kind of mold that. Those are things that are easy to fix.
The reason they say is awareness, I believe. Okay, so this is where my Purdue fandom is going to come into play here.
Right. So I was going to step aside and be
I still watched every game.
Right.
And they have that knock on his awareness because they have him listed as a linebacker. And when he had to drop back into coverage, it was a learning process for him. He was learning how to drop back into coverage. He's always been a hand in the dirt, rush the passer, stop the run type guy. When those are the things he has to do, he is an all Big Ten caliber player. He was one of the best players out on the field every game that was what he had to do. But when you had to have him drop back into coverage, or he had to cover a tight end or something, that's where his weaknesses were deficient. When Purdue switched to a 3-4 defense, it really kind of put him into a different situation where they're like, okay, now you got to cover people. And it's like, that's not his skill set. That's not his wheelhouse. So that's why I picked Derek Barnes here, because he's a nasty baller, essentially. This guy has a mean streak to him. And I don't want to compare him fully, but a mean streak, kind of like a Ray Lewis. He will hit you, and you will remember that hit. But he can get to the quarterback. He can stop the run in the backfield. He knows how to penetrate the offensive line, but he also knows how to kind of knows how to read coverages. Not too great, but he knows how to read the run from playing linebacker. This is a guy that you could use. He's going to be a depth piece, but he may be one of those guys that when you draft him, he's a depth piece for a while, but all of a sudden you're like, I need to get this guy out on the field as much as possible, and he works his way into a starting role somehow. He's a more athletic defensive end, we can say. Similar almost to a Ryan Kerrigan coming out of Purdue as well. Maybe a little bit more athletic. I don't know. If he's available and the Colts take him, oh my gosh, they're going to absolutely love this pick, because he has all of the potential in the world. This is a guy that also just lit up the Senior Bowl. He was one of the better performers in the Senior Bowl and left people talking. So I'm really excited to see how his pro career unfolds.
Yeah, it's funny too. When I saw there was a Purdue player at 165 available, I was like, I think B. Scott's gonna like this if I pick the Purdue player that's available. And so
that's who I picked. And yeah. I didn't pick him because he was a Purdue player.
Right.
I know more about him because he's a Purdue player, but his fit and what the Colts need is ideal. If there is somebody that could be like a next Robert Mathis, it's him. He's built like a Robert Mathis.
Yeah, no, it'd be an exciting pick for sure. You act like me bringing up the fact that you're a Purdue guy is like a knock. I just like to give you an opportunity to spout off whenever you can about Purdue athletics. I'm just lobbing them up for you.
I could have taken Rondale Moore there at 21.
He was available for me too at like 54 or 21. I can't remember which, but I was like, ooh, do I do it?
He was never available for me at 54. At 21, he was always available.
Right.
Value-wise,
no.
He's not. You don't want him at 21.
Right.
If he's around at 54 and you take an offensive tackle at 21, if he's around at 54, you look long and hard. You really consider that move, but not at 21.
Right. So for me, at 206, their sixth round pick, I went with Jamian Sherwood, safety out of Auburn. His NFL comparison is Clayton Geathers, who is a former Colt. I know. I mean, maybe not the best. I know he wasn't very highly regarded, but at the same time,
couldn't stay on the field.
Right. Well, and I mean, maybe Jamian will. I mean, he's draft experts believe he can be moved to linebacker. So again, it's another situation where he doesn't, necessarily on paper, he's not like a just, hey, he's going to be, a solid safety in the NFL. So because he can kind of be molded into whatever you want, I feel like that's the best way for the Colts to be able to go. He's 6'2" with a massive wingspan, but he does lack in speed. That's one of the things, because a lot of times when I saw experts say, like, oh, he, like we talked about with Barnes, he lacks awareness, stuff, like, or he's raw. All that stuff, I feel like can be fixed. You can't really fix your speed. You can't fix how fast you are.
You can slightly. There's speed coaches out there.
Right.
There are. But it's not as easy. It's not as easy.
Right. So, so I just went with the fact that the dude is, he's big, he's strong. You can use him at multiple positions. Not that they would end up doing something like that, but he can be converted into a linebacker, which is
a really good special teams player.
Right. So that's what I was looking at out of Auburn. To another situation where I had the choice between, a couple of players towards the end of the draft, and I kind of went with my gut because I think there was a corner out of I want to say it was out of Illinois that was projected to go around the same spot. And so I went with the safety out of Auburn. So I think it's a solid pick. Obviously, I got a C+ for it. So, obviously, Pro Football Focus didn't think so. But I went with Jamie and Sherwood, the next Clayton Geathers, keep the Clayton Geathers like player profiles with the Indianapolis Colts.
So I'll just say for my draft, I did not go secondary at all. I was finding that later on in the draft, the value for corners and safeties just wasn't as high as other players. So at 206, I went with another edge rusher. At this point from in 6th and 7th round, it really is a crapshoot. You just don't know if how these guys are going to pan out, if they're going to pan out at all. So I went with Malcolm Kuntz out of Buffalo. Got a little Maction in there. But I don't know too much about this guy. I just know that the Colts, they need some help at edge rush, and bringing in bodies that you can basically run through an audition and see who can really step up. I don't know if necessarily he'd be a good special teams player. He may be one of those guys that you put out there to try to block field goals or punts. I don't know, but got me an A- rating. So I'm happy with it. But like I said, in the 6th and 7th round, it's so tough.
Yeah, it really is. That's why with my last pick 248, 7th round, I was like, you know what? There wasn't really a wide receiver that caught my eye towards the end of the draft.
Occasionally for me, wide receiver Walt Fillier from IU was available, and that would be an interesting pick considering I believe he's from Fishers.
Ooh, that'd be solid.
So just some local flavor to round things out, and that's the type of thing you see happen.
Right.
A lot. I picked him once, and when he was available, and it was a really highly graded pick for 248.
Yeah, I got a C+ for my pick. I went with Duke tight end Noah Gray. He moves well.
Tight end is so tough.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is too, like, I don't know. They didn't really give his, hands too great a praise. They said he was a better blocker than anything else. He moves well. He's good at blocking schemes, and he does excel in footwork and route running. So it seems like, he's a blocking tight end first that can later be, maybe turned into a better receiving threat. Obviously not, receiving.
Mo Cox type player.
Right. So that's kind of what I went for. I went for just because that's the thing. Like for instance, if this draft pans out, or even your draft pans out, or a combination of the two, and they end up getting Elijah Moore. I mean, we're adding Elijah Moore to Zach Pascal, T.Y. Hilton, Paris Campbell, Michael Pittman. Like you're at it. That's a pretty solid receiving core. But I just feel like the more talent that you can throw at Carson Wentz, the more offensive weapons you can throw at Carson Wentz, whether they're top of the line talents or just kind of guys that could be molded into an offensive weapon. I think that's the way you got to go. Just because I'm not 100%. I mean, we know what T.Y. Hilton can do at his best. We know that Zach Pascal has been an insanely good wide receiver for the Colts. But both of those players have their question marks. Paris Campbell has his, can't stay healthy. Michael Pittman was solid, but also dealt with some injuries last season. I mean, it's 1 year, so you don't want to be like, oh well, he's you can't say too much. But like that's the thing. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I feel like if they can get a home run in those first couple of picks, and then kind of sprinkle in another pick or two of offensive talent to make sure they at least throw as many darts at the board as possible, I think that's the way you got to go.
Yeah, my pick at 248 landed me an A- grade as well. Linebacker Isaiah McDuffie out of Boston College. Went with that pick mostly because they do need depth at linebacker. Again, don't know too much about him. Just he'd be a good body, potentially a good special teams player. Graded out well. And I with this mock draft, I was really wanting to really focus on the front seven for the defense. Obviously, 4 of my 6 picks are defensive front seven, and a couple of with Derek Barnes, you can move him around a little bit, but that's really where the focus needs to be this year. I feel like you got those two big needs on offense, which were met early, and then you just need to bring in bodies that are serviceable, that have potential to be good, solid pieces. And because you're not looking to draft the next Dwight Freeney or Robert Mathis, or really the next Dwight Freeney. That's so hard, especially when you look at the edge rushers that are available up there in the first round. There's so many big question marks surrounding him, especially on the injury front. And with the amount of injuries the Colts experience, I don't know if I'd be wanting to draft somebody that has injury red flags on them. It's a little tough for me. But yeah, I went with Isaiah McDuffie. Overall, my overall draft score came out to an A-.
Yeah, I was like, mine was a B+, so I'll definitely take it. And yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, obviously, on the one hand, that these guys have a lot more to go off scout wise, but then on the other hand, like whenever I opened a tab on a player and it was like, yeah, he missed most of his senior season, I'm like, oh nope, not gonna click on that because that's already a huge question mark, not only for being healthy for this season, but also just that injury proneness lurking the rest of the way. So yeah, overall, I mean, if the Colts have either one of these drafts that we had, like, and it rates out to be a B+, A-, like, I'll be happy. And like I said, I don't have, this is a pivotal draft for Chris Ballard. I have no doubts that he'll pass the test. It's just, this is a very significant draft for him to succeed at.
Right. And it can't be one that there's too many misses at the top half of the draft for them. Especially but he also does play the undrafted free agent role pretty well.
True. So going ahead and going into some other draft storylines quickly before we wrap up things here tonight. So we're going to do some hot or cold with the rest of the storylines here in the draft class. First of all, hot or cold, this quarterback class is the best since 2004. That's what we saw with Eli Manning, Big Ben, and Phillip Rivers. That's one of the storylines I was looking at, the big storylines going into the draft. That's what one of the things CBS Sports had, was if this draft class, could be as good as 2004. And I dove into it a little bit. The 2004 quarterback class, it's a cold take for me, by the way. The 2004 quarterback class wound up with 4 Super Bowl rings and produced 3 passers who are currently 5th, 7th, and 8th on the all-time passing list. Or passing yards list. All 3 are also in the top 10 all-time in passing touchdowns. And then, diving through it pick by pick here, I mean, Jacksonville's slated to get Trevor Lawrence, but they've never had been in a position to have this kind of talent before. I mean, they've had good quarterbacks in Mark Brunell, David Garrard, Byron Leftwich, who, ended up winning a Super Bowl, but as an offensive coordinator. And, I mean, this is the best the best quarterbacks they've drafted are those 2 guys, but they've never made it past. They didn't draft Mark Brunell, I don't think. I think he was in the expansion draft technically, maybe. But anyway, getting Byron Leftwich and David Garrard were really big for them, but never made it past the divisional round. And they're far from the team that went to the AFC title game with a few years back. So, I mean, you're trusting this Jacksonville team who has been in a position to succeed here the last few years and hasn't really done it, with being able to take a talent like Trevor Lawrence, which he's far and away the best talent in the draft, but I don't know if he's kind of a once-in-a-generation player like, other quarterbacks have been billed at in the past. He may end up being amazing, and I think he will be good. But you're asking a lot to be like, oh, hey, are you going to go win multiple Super Bowls and be, the next big thing in Jacksonville? And maybe he will, but I don't think it's, anything super set in stone. And then while Justin Fields is the best quarterback prospect to come out of Ohio State, the Buckeyes have yet to produce an all-pro level quarterback. So quarterbacks that have come out in the past, I mean, Braxton Miller and I'm blanking on his name. I don't know why. JT Barrett both ended up being wide receivers. You have Troy Smith and Terrell Pryor, who Terrell Pryor ended up being a good receiver himself, but those guys never really panned out. So they don't really, Ohio State hasn't really panned out, and churned out a really good, Hall of Fame.
They're not known for quarterbacks though, which is it's just surprising.
Right.
They're more running backs,
defensive players,
receivers, and defensive backs.
Yeah.
Oh, and defensive ends.
Right. So, I mean, I think Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence are still far and away the two best talents in this year's draft. And then, that's kind of what I'm saying the rest of the way here. I mean, the rest of the quarterback class are toss-ups. And, I mean, we do have the luxury of looking at the 2004 class, well after the fact, but the equivalent would be if Lawrence and Fields had come out with Burrow last season. If the class last year would have been Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, then I'd be like, hey, maybe this is the best class since 2004. But I mean, 2005 had Aaron Rodgers, Alex Smith, Ryan Fitzpatrick. That may be a little bit more on par with what we might see out of this year's draft class. I can see one of them being, the next great Hall of Fame quarterback, but I don't know about all three being Hall of Fame caliber. And then 2012 even had, Russell Wilson, Andrew Luck, and Ryan Tannehill. Obviously, one of them is retired now. But at the same time, I think those are two other classes, 05 and 12, that had good quarterbacks as well that you could compare, I think, more successfully or more easily to 2004 than this year's class.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, is this going to be the best class since 2004? It's so hard. You don't know. I mean, we're looking at – I even saw – somebody said today, they believe – I think I was on Get Up this morning. I think that somebody said – I don't know who said it, but they said Trevor Lawrence will at least play in 2 to 3 Super Bowls. I'm like – and who's going to be the team?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, it's so tough because it's not just about the quarterback. It's about the pieces that are surrounding him as well. I don't know. Well, I mean, I'm going to say Cole just because it's too hard to tell. It's just too hard to tell. I mean, and then the question is who's going to be the best quarterback in this draft? Spoiler alert, that's our next question.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is too, I think at the time, Pittsburgh, obviously Roethlisberger went to Pittsburgh. Very successful, one of the most successful franchises in NFL history. And I don't think they were bad at the time. I mean, they were bad enough to get the 7th pick, obviously, but I mean, they weren't they're, a dumpster fire.
They had pieces and a solid coaching.
Well, they had, they had Hines Ward, Plaxico Burress. They had Willie Parker, Jerome Bettis still. They had all that talent still up.
And their defense was just on the cusp of being amazing.
Right. These were teams where their rosters were literally a quarterback away from being good. They
had one bad year.
Right. Whereas these are teams that they're going to now, which are, is more par for the course with what we've seen here in the past, where these are bad teams that also don't have a quarterback. And that's one of the reasons why they're so bad. So yeah, I mean, it's a thing where, yes, we, it doesn't help us that we have the 2004 was such a great class, and we can go back and look at what they were able to do, and we don't know what these guys are going to do. But just looking at it's kind of like the comparison you saw around the Super Bowl where Patrick Mahomes to Tom Brady. It's Patrick Mahomes, I 7 Super Bowl championships is not. I don't think that's a record that will ever be broken. So to say Patrick Mahomes, is, could be the next player that does that. Nobody's going to do that. Patrick Mahomes may win 3 or 4, and that's even uncommon. So to win almost double that is insanity. So, I mean, so to think that any draft class can produce 3 Hall of Famers, I feel is asking a lot. So, I mean, and I just don't see that with this group. And like I said, if it would have been last year with Burrow in the mix, and those, you would have 3 solid names, all highly touted. I can make the comparison. Whereas this is two talents that are going to be, put in, crazy positions, and then, flip a coin for the rest of them as far as whether or not they're going to be good or not. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is it's too hard to tell.
Right. So moving on to the next question. Of this quarterback class, Trevor Lawrence will have the best rookie season, hot or cold. For me, it's a cold take, and I think it's going to be whoever gets drafted by San Francisco. And the reason why I say that is they'll be working under Kyle Shanahan. Of the teams that are projected to take a quarterback, the 49ers have the best roster around them. Solid wide receiver core led by Deebo Samuel. They have George Kittle at tight end. And they're only a couple of seasons away from having a top-tier defense. This is the situation that I was talking about that Pittsburgh, San Diego, and New York had when they took those guys in the 2004 draft, where they were like, this team literally is a quarterback away, which I'm not really sure why they are, like, the 49ers already have moved off Garoppolo. That's kind of a weird situation to me. But especially after, I mean, they traded a pick. They traded like a first round pick for Garoppolo, didn't they? Or something like that.
Yeah, they gave up quite a bit.
Right. So kind of weird they've already moved off of him. I don't know if they're planning on like moving him again. But anyway, neither here nor there. Now they're projected to take of the players they're projected to take. They could take Justin Fields, Mac Jones, or Trey Lance. I think Justin Fields is, in my opinion, the second best quarterback in the draft. And I think he'll be a better long-term move. But again, like I said before, and the reason why I think Mac Jones would be a solid pick for them is we've already seen what he can do with a lot of talent around him. And that sounds kind of like a silly, like, of course he did well with a lot of talent around him. But, I mean, hey, you need a guy who's just not going to screw things up. You need a Kyle Orton. It's the argument that I've made in the past for Jared Goff, Blake Bortles. You need, you put Blake Bortles on the Buccaneers last year. I don't know if they win the Super Bowl, maybe, but they're going to be a good team. Jared Goff had a Super Bowl season with the Rams with a great defense and a great offense around him. So you put a guy like Mac Jones on the 49ers, I think he can be successful. So yeah, I think that whoever the 49ers end up taking will have the best rookie season, because I think there's still so many question marks around the Jaguars. There's so they need so much talent on that team. I mean, this is a team that, won one game last year, beat the Colts in week 1, and then didn't win again the rest of the season, which I did see a funny TikTok about that where, there's this meme where, those kind of like old movies where they, like, at the end during the credits, they show like where the characters are now. And that's kind of what they do with the, it was like, it showed the tweet at the beginning of the season for the Jaguars that was like, we're not satisfied with 1-0, and then it fades that picture away, and it says they were in fact satisfied with 1-0. They didn't win a game the rest of the season. So yeah, there's just so many question marks around the other teams that need quarterbacks, and San Francisco is the most solid roster that also still needs that at quarterback.
I agree with that take. Whoever San Francisco drafts, but I'm also the other team that is interesting that is looking to potentially move up into the top 10 to grab one of these top tier quarterbacks is the New England Patriots. I don't know if you could say they'll be successful, considering Cam Newton's most likely going to be the starter again. But yeah, I do believe the San Francisco 49ers are one of those teams that are going to be the most successful. Whoever lands there will have the most successful rookie season, just because they have the weapons. And if their defense is healthy, they have a really strong defense as well. So I totally agree with that take.
All right, so final question here, and that is the Bengals should take Jamar Chase over Penei Sewell. And so for me, I just wanted to play devil's advocate. I had done through our 4 questions of hot or cold. I had 3 cold takes. And so I was like, screw it. We'll do a hot take on this one.
It's like taking a test. Oh, I've been putting A and B too many
right.
times. This answer has to be C.
Well, I was telling Chris of the MCT podcast that you can check out on YouTube every Saturday. I was telling Chris Simmons that it's really tough to write hot or cold questions, because you unconsciously or subconsciously end up writing towards your viewpoint. And so theoretically, depending on how you word the question, it can either be all cold takes or all hot takes, because you're phrasing the question how you're thinking of it in your mind. So You know,
Right.
so you have to try. What's the most neutral way I can ask? Like I've reworded questions so that I wouldn't take the same like answer every time, basically. I've gone the opposite way to make sure like it's not straight all colds or all hots. So for me, it's a hot take, and that's you got a lot of history between Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. They played together on the 2019 LSU National Championship team. He did catch 20 of Burrow's 60+ touchdown passes that season. And basically, the reason why I'm playing devil's advocate here is because this year's offensive line pool is a lot deeper than the wide receiver pool. You can still nab a quality offensive lineman in the second round and beyond. And there's a lot of teams that need offensive linemen. There's a lot of teams, when I was looking back through it, which teams had the worst offensive line last year. You see the Giants there, and you see some of the other teams around where the Bengals are ranked, and they're not projected to take offensive linemen in the first round. So there's other teams with an offensive line as bad as the Bengals that aren't prioritizing, or at least aren't projected to prioritize offensive line with their first round pick.
But that's because of also where players are rated, though.
True.
If Penei Sewell falls to the Giants, they're not prioritizing anything else other than Penei Sewell.
Right. Like this offensive line was ranked 30th last year. I think basically what I'm saying is, based on the, what the other teams around them are taking, who also need offensive line. I think Burrow's injury last season was terrible, and they need to improve the offensive line, obviously. But you pair up Jamar Chase alongside T. Higgins, you add a couple other pieces. That offense could be really good, and I think that you can still. Only one team that needs offensive line is going to get Penei Sewell, and
it's the Bengals,
right? But I'm just saying that
they can have all the weapons in the world if he doesn't have time to throw to them.
But that's not like they're gonna if for whatever reason they don't take him, it's not like they're doomed and Burrow's gonna be sacked 60 times if they don't take him. They can find a quality offensive lineman in the next round and still, because guess what? Jamar Chase is one of the best wide receivers in this year's draft.
He's not the best.
Well, you do have Devonta Smith out there who's going to be pretty good too. So, but anyway,
one of the first wide receivers in a long time to win the Heisman.
Right. So, I just think that, like I said, playing devil's advocate here, I just think that you can still address your offensive line. It's kind of like with the Colts. You could flip, you and I flipped, we weren't in position to get Sewell, but we flip-flopped tackle wide receiver. I think that the Bengals could do that too and still wind up not having Joe Burrow be, let off in a stretcher at the end of the year.
Okay, so I read a tweet earlier today that said if the Bengals are looking to do anything other than draft Penei Sewell, they need to stop. Because this situation where their offensive line is at a point where you could see Joe Burrow end up being the next Andrew Luck. It doesn't matter who's around you, especially if Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are guys that are going to make their bread and butter is the deep ball. Well, in order for the deep ball to work, you got to give your quarterback time in the pocket. And you're not going to pass up on a can't-miss offensive tackle prospect for another weapon when you just spent last year's number one pick on a quarterback. You got to keep that quarterback upright to make those weapons work. And where they pick, there's plenty of weapons still available in the second round. And heck, if you are really feeling it, you could even trade back into the first round if you wanted to. Somebody would be a very willing trade partner to get the 33rd pick or whatever the pick is for them. And it's might as well be a first round pick still. I don't think they pass up the opportunity to take Sewell over to get another wide receiver. If they do, everybody will give them an F grade for that pick. Not because the player's a bad player, but because it does not fit what they really, 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 really need to help continue the growth of Joe Burrow.
But it would be a Bengals move, though.
That's not even a Bengals move. That's a Raiders move.
Yeah, who's just fast? It doesn't matter what his hands are. Is he fast? That's what we want. Well, B. Scott, I know that you get. I mean, I obviously I love talking NFL draft, but I know this is a show that you get hyped up for as much as I do when we do the MLB preview. So, is there anything we didn't touch on tonight that you want to make sure you say before we sign off for the night?
Just be prepared for a wild night of trades. There's a lot of rumors going around that some teams are looking to move up into the top 10 to grab their quarterbacks. I mean, it's top heavy with quarterbacks this year, so that you're going to see some really good prospects fall to teams like the Colts or later, because you're going to have teams that are going to try to make those runs on those top tier quarterbacks that are really needy. That's why it's always so. That's why I am glad the Colts did make the trade for Carson Wentz, so they're not in that position of trying to move up and sell the farm to get a Mac Jones or a Trey Lance or somebody like that. So just be prepared for a lot of wild moves. And if one of your teams is picking in the back half of the first round, you go ahead, stay up late if you want on Thursday. Go for it. I'll do it regardless. But don't be surprised if when your team comes up to pick, all of a sudden the logo changes to another team because they made a trade. That seems to be very common these days on the back half of the draft, is these teams will make moves with the guys that are picking early in the second round and steal some picks from them. That's why I can honestly say I believe that is why the teams that are constantly picking up near the front of the draft are always up there, and the teams that are near the back half of the first round are always back there, because they just poach draft picks off of the bad teams, because the bad teams are always trying to move up for that better talent, whereas the guys that are good are like, I can get the same kind of talent back where you were picking, but you're too antsy, and
right.
They take advantage of that. So there's going to be a lot of moving. We've seen it here in the past few years. There's going to be a lot of moving around just because your team's slated to pick at a certain point. Ultimately, in the end, I don't think ultimately the Colts will be picking at 21. And push comes to shove, I would not be the least bit surprised if the Colts do not pick on Thursday night even. That's my bold prediction. My bold prediction is the Colts will not use a first-round pick this year. Their first-round pick will be given to somebody else, and the Colts will pick up an additional second round or third round or whatever it may be.
Yeah,
they're going to pick up picks.
Right, and I mean, they didn't have a first-rounder last year, right? So I mean, it's not like it's unprecedented. So and you talk about waiting the whole night. I mean, literally, Lamar Jackson was the 32nd pick in the draft.
But last year, though, the difference is for the Colts is they still had, I think, one of the Jets picks. So they were picking like the second pick of the second round.
So essentially, they're like picking 8 picks later or whatever it was. So it wasn't that big of a deal. But
no, they were 13 last year.
Oh, were they? Oh, yeah, I guess they were. Dang.
They were up high last year. So they had 2 really good second round picks, but their second round pick was essentially just a late first rounder.
Right, pretty much. Well, that will do it for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Dusty up in the chat, everybody who listened, watched, all that good stuff. Remember, you can like us on Facebook, Crash Course Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Crash Course FM. You can go to our YouTube page, 3C Media, where not only can you see this podcast every Tuesday, but you can also see the MCT podcast, our YouTube exclusive podcast, every single Saturday. So go ahead and check them out. We're at 30 subscribers. Thank you guys all for your support. Let's make it up to 35, 40, 50. Let's start growing that channel. And then also remember, you can watch us live every Monday, twitch.tv/3C Media. And you can listen to us every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. B. Scott, where can they find you?
You can always find me on Twitter at Brandon_Scott87, and I'm starting to toss around the idea of an OnlyFans account. Got to pay the bills.
There you go. I mean, hey, you know what? I will. I will definitely support you. I don't know how I would support you, but I definitely, we're here to support the boys. So, I'll do what I can. But yeah, that will do it for this week's edition of the podcast. Next week, we will have it dedicated to wrapping up the Colts draft, and we'll be letting you guys know what we think about all the picks the Colts made, as well as reviewing the NFL draft as a whole. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's one of the best times of the year, and it leads into the best month of the year, the month of May. So very excited for the content coming up. But until then, have a good week, everybody.